Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Remember, the Bill of Rights were implemented on demand of the states for an additional layer of protection against government tyranny. Noah Webster said, "Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom in Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any band of regular troops can be on any pretense raised in the United States." This was typical of the founders' beliefs on the Second Amendment. The people need to be armed, protect themselves against potential government tyranny. Hunting and all this stuff was secondary. Safety was primary. 10th Amendment. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. The language couldn't be clearer, could it? That seems pretty straightforward to me. The power is delegated, or the enumerated powers, referred to in Article 1, Section 1, where it gives all legislative powers to Congress that are herein granted. Those are the enumerated powers. The delegated powers are the ones referred to in the elastic clause as the foregoing powers. So these are things, folks, that we need to understand. There's a movement afoot by a number of states to enforce the 10th Amendment. This is a really good tool that we should be using now to fight against government. I think there's 34 or 5 states engaged together, and one of the problems back against the government, perhaps on this issue right here. Given our time constraints, I'd like to close with the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court in 1872, 4 years after the amendment, stated that its main purpose was to establish the citizenship of the Negro can admit to no doubt. That was a primary purpose of the 14th Amendment. So with its primary purpose in mind, let's look at the amendment itself. Article 14, Section 1 says, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state where they reside." Let's look at that right there for a moment. Subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I've read the minutes of the hearings in Congress when they wrote this amendment. And they specifically stated that subject to this jurisdiction thereof did not include people visiting here, having children, and that child being a citizen, because they were subject to the jurisdiction of the country where they came from. We can't put them on jurors. We can't conscript them in the draft. They're not subject to they're subject to our laws, but not our jurisdiction. And so when you have someone loyal to another country, subject to their jurisdiction, when they come here to have a child under our 14th Amendment, that child was not to be a citizen. Now, how do we get from there to where people slip across the border and have anchor babies illegally? It's because in the late 1800s, the Supreme Court, in all of its wisdom, went back to the English common law, which we use routinely. Even English common law is very, very important. But in Blackstone's Commentary of the Law, he said, man's law must be subject to the law of his creator. You can't have conflict. So it's a very important. It was established over thousands of years. But in there, it said if a person is born in a country, well, then that person is automatically a citizen of that country under common law. But when we have a constitution that changes that part of the common law, our constitution reigns supreme. You can't change that. You can't change the Constitution with an interpretation of English common law, yet that's what the courts have done, and it's a huge problem for this country. Anchor babies. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of law. Now, let's look at this a little closer. Remember, we talked earlier about privileges and immunities being separated from rights. Privileges and immunities are set aside here for citizens, where rights of people are God-given. Only rights come from God, not from government. Privileges come from government. So when we talked earlier about privileges and immunities being given to Guantanamo Bay terrorists under habeas corpus and Miranda rights and all this. It shouldn't be done that way. They get given rights to protect them in their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, so long as it's done under due process of law. And they set that up with the military tribunals down there in Guantanamo Bay. So remember, the purpose of this, again, was to bring the rights of the Negro up to the rights of everybody else, that their privileges and immunities could not be denied by states with state laws, nor could their right to life, liberty, and property be denied through state laws. That's the purpose of this right here. Here's a list of Supreme Court decisions based on the 14th Amendment. This is just a very small partial list. In McIntosh, U.S. versus McIntosh in 1931, they said allegiance to federal government must take priority over allegiance to God. Have you ever heard of such a thing? That's our court system for you. McClellan versus Board of Education in 1948. We are all agreed that the First and the 14th Amendments have a secular reach far more penetrating in the conduct of government than merely to forbid an established church. This has nothing to do with bringing the rights of the Negro up to the rights of everybody else. They've usurped authority under this that was never intended. That wasn't the intent of the authors of this amendment. Engel versus Vitale in 62. Every session of Congress begins with prayer. But do Christians in schools have the same rights? Because the 14th Amendment, in this case, no. They're not even allowed to read the prayers from Capitol Hill. The prayers made in Capitol Hill, they can't even read in the schools. Stone v. Graham in 1980. The 14th Amendment allows the federal courts to reach into local school classrooms and rip any copy of the Ten Commandments off the walls because, listen to this, they might induce the children to read, meditate upon, perhaps to venerate and obey the commandments. All horrors be to the 14th. And we're wondering why we're having so many school shootings today. That's because we've done like Joseph Stalin said, we've allowed them to take away our patriotism or religion morality in our schools. And we wonder what's happening to us. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the law. Can anyone tell me how the court found jurisdiction in the above amendment to completely remove all vestiges of religious principles from all government institutions when we were founded on Judeo-Christian principles? You can't find any. That's been a total usurpation, and in my opinion, grounds for impeachment. It's way past time for the people to stand up and speak up. We are the earthly sovereigns in our nation. We must reestablish our Judeo-Christian foundations and our limited constitutional republic. When you see violations like we reviewed, we must contact our public servants and demand that they stop. If our elected public servants will not use the tools they have to set exceptions for the courts, to no longer attack our Christian foundations, or to impeach those judges who will not comply, and if they refuse to shrink our federal government back within the confines of our Constitution, they must be replaced. It's up to us now, folks. Will you join in this battle of worldviews for the sake of our posterity, like those who've gone before us and sacrificing everything that they have? Folks, we've covered a lot of ground here today. Are there any questions or comments? If there are, please consider going to my website. If you want to remember the name, remember to preserve our Constitution in the United States of America, you go to pocusa.info. So again, to get information about preserving our Constitution in the United States of America, go to pocusa.info. Thanks for your attention today. Thanks for listening. I appreciate your interest, and God bless America.